I'm Gina Bell, and I'm a storyteller. This is Jars of Arioch, Chapter 6, Arioch and a Tornado of Blackbirds. Benoit picked us up at 9 a.m. for the funeral. I told Benoit what I had done with the mason jar, and she seemed intrigued. I told her about the shadow I had seen in front of my room. We stopped at a nice hotel downtown and picked up the 2 detectives from LAPD. The line of police cars seemed to go on for miles. Reagan would be buried at the White Oak Flats Cemetery. It was an incredibly old cemetery right in the middle of downtown Gatlinburg. The cemetery is on a hill right behind Gatlinburg's tourist trap parkway. You had to know it was there, or you'd never find it. It was sunny as we walked up the hill to the cemetery. I could feel the humidity beginning to rise. I heard mosquitoes buzzing around my face and watched sweat begin to pool on my arms. A gnat landed on me, and I watched as it got stuck in the sweat on my forearm. I had never seen so many police cars in one place before. They were parked everywhere. As we approached the cemetery, I could see fresh flowers here and there. I heard Dugost in his thick accent say, "Dear God!" Someone had written in red all over the headstones. It looked terribly like the Enochian I had written myself the night before. Not one headstone had been left untouched. Benoit pulled out her phone and began trying to decode the symbols. On each headstone in Enochian were the words, "I am Arioch." Benoit looked at me with her mouth open and in her lovely accent said, "Well, I guess we at least are communicating now." She quickly began researching for references of the name Arioch. "Well, it says here that Arioch is mentioned in Genesis and in Milton's Paradise Lost. No shock there. I'm going to need to take some time to figure out more on the name and see if they can tell us anything." Benoit took photos and sampled the red used to paint his name. It, of course, turned out to be blood. It was decided that despite the discovered vandalism, the funeral would continue as planned. The officers in attendance were not going to allow this criminal that they assumed was toying with them to disrupt this day. They needed this. The town needed this. Their hate and fury would have to be pushed down until the end of the service. The funeral was genuinely nice. Everyone who was anyone in Gatlinburg was there. Several faces in the crowd I recognized from the news. I had seen them talking about how Gatlinburg was going to bring justice to the man or men responsible for the death of Chief Reagan. Bill Reagan and his mother were seated in the front row. Chief Reagan's widow looked like she was in shock. She just sat there looking straight ahead. No tears, no anything. Bill Reagan Jr. sat motionlessly crying. He didn't make any sounds or sniffle. He never contorted his face in any way, but a constant flow of tears streamed down his cheeks. The Reverend spoke of how Chief Reagan had helped his community and went on to talk about what a great man the chief had been. The service ended and people began shuffling back to their cars. Hope's tail began to wag, and I knew someone was here that she knew. Her little blue butt wiggled, but she never attempts to leave my side. I saw Raven Wolf weaving through people to get to us. She walked up and stood between me and Benoit. Young and Degast stood with us also. "I want to thank you, Detective, for what you did for my family. I have not seen that sort of kindness in an awfully long time," Raven said to Degast. "After y'all left yesterday, Crow called me and told me everything Nanny said. I know she must sound like an old crazy woman to you, and you'd be right. But that old crazy woman, she was the baddest bitch I ever known. When she was young, she wasn't afraid of nothing. Still ain't. I don't know if she's right. Nanny told my sister Crow that this thing is feeding off this violence and bloodshed that the angrier we get, the stronger he gets. Feel the energy coming around you, don't you? You feel it?" she asked while looking me in the eyes. "Yes," I responded. "It's a sick-to-your-stomach sort of feeling. It's pain and guilt and grief and shame, all mixed up in one. It's awful." "Do y'all know what these symbols mean yet?" Raven asked us. It says, 'I am Arioch.' Does the name Arioch mean anything to you?" Benoit asked Raven. "No, the name means nothing to me. I've never heard it before. What is that?" Raven pointed to a woman that seemed to be sneaking around and taking pictures of the defaced headstones. "That's the lady from the news. She came to my hotel room yesterday and wanted to interview me. I told her I'd have to talk to you guys first and let her know." "You didn't say anything to her, did you? Nothing about the details of the case?" Detective Young asked me. "No," I answered. "Are you sure?" Young asked again. "She told you she didn't tell her anything," Benoit answered. "They are keeping many of the details out of the news, Tracy. We need to make sure not to talk to anyone. Once the new chief is assigned, they'll have a news conference. You don't need to bother with her. You might say something that only the killer would know. If we tell him everything, we might jeopardize the case." I know. I watch First 48 and all that shit. Travis and I used to watch them together and try and solve them along with the cops on TV. I looked around me and saw all the people that had shown up for the chief's funeral and thought of Travis. There would be no funeral for him. It was like he had never been born. I missed him so much, and even though I had hope, it just wasn't the same. I felt my dog licking the inside of my hand. My heart began to pound out of my chest. I could feel myself starting to sweat. A panic attack was starting. I felt my knees begin to get weak, and Benoit put her arm around my waist. She caught me on one side and Raven caught me on the other. Their hands around me was the last thing I felt before I passed out. I opened my eyes and I was alone in the cemetery. I sat up slowly and looked around me. The sky had darkened and there was a slight breeze. It felt like hours had passed. It felt like dusk. You know, that brief time between day and night. The red writing was gone from all the headstones. Right next to the mound of dirt beside Reagan's burial plot was a man on his knees. I walked to him, and as I approached, a familiar smell filled the air. It was Travis. His hands were sewn to his ears, just like they had been at Acorn Branch. His skin was rotting, and he was in agony. I ran to him and began to untie him. He screamed in pain, and I jolted my hands away. "Travis! Oh my God, Travis! Let me help you!" I tried to gently untie his feet, and he screamed again. I sat on my knees, and I told him that I loved him over and over. I told him how sorry I was that I hadn't been there to save him. I can't hear you, Tracy. I can't hear, Tracy. It hurts. Please help me." I got as close as I could to his face and gently touched his lips. We were both shaking. I mouthed the words, "I love you, and I miss you. I miss you so much, Travis." As my fingers touched his lips, I began to see images of the things Travis would have done had he not been stopped. Horrible things to little girls and boys. I saw my own nieces and nephews being abused by my brother. I saw countless children looking up at me, and they began screaming for help, each one of their little souls crying out for me to make him stop. I moved away from him quickly and fell backwards. Travis began apologizing for himself. Travis did that a lot in life, and he was still doing it in death. He was sorry, but not sorry enough to have ever stopped. They were all right about him. I understand now. Travis would have never stopped. Just like our mother, and most likely just like our father. People like that destroy everything in their path and then apologize to the rubble they leave behind. I looked around and the headstones were once again covered in red symbols. The symbols were slightly different. I could make out the I am, but not the other symbol. I tried to remember it so that I could look it up later. I didn't know where my phone was. I didn't know where anyone was. Even my dog was gone. "Hope!" I yelled into the darkness that now surrounded me. I heard her barking, and as I came to, there were people surrounding me, and they all had their cell phones out pointed at me. They were recording me. One of them was Megan McLeod from the local news team. Benoit and the others were trying to keep them back, and Hope had her body across me. She was barking and snarling at everyone. My small group of friends were all looking down at me with worry, except for Raven. Raven cradled my head in her hands and had a wet cloth. She was rubbing it on my head. "You can't keep your distance from grief, baby girl," Raven said. "Grief is the price we pay for love, and it won't be ignored forever. Only death really heals grief, and you are nowhere near death yet, Tracy Thomas." An ambulance pulled up for me, and the funeral attendees now went back to their services. They checked my vitals and asked a few questions. They offered to take me to the hospital, but I declined. They got me back into Benoit's rental car and turned on the AC. Raven stood by my open window. We all sat in silence for a minute or so. Then Detective Young started in. "What language was that? You never mentioned that you could speak. What was that?" "It's going to take me a minute to translate it, Detective. But I'm pretty sure you were speaking Enochian, Tracy," Benoit said. "Wait, what?" "You passed out, and then you had some sort of seizure. Have you ever had seizures before?" Benoit asked me. "No. Sometimes I pass out when I have a panic attack, but I've never had a seizure. Does anyone have a pen and some paper?" I looked back at Young. I knew he had one, and he handed them to me from the back seat. I quickly drew the symbol I had seen while I passed out. "I don't know Enochian, but I saw this symbol when I was out for the count." I drew the symbol as best I could from memory. Benoit took out her phone and played the video of me. I was shaking violently, and there was drool spilling out of my mouth. I was talking in what seemed to be like two voices. Benoit took us back to the motel, and Raven followed. As we pulled into the parking lot, I could hear Blue barking. Kai was up on her crutches and was waving at me. We all went up to my room, and Kai came in also. "I sent everything, including the video of your seizure, to my translation team, and they're supposed to give me a call ASAP. You sounded like you were speaking in two voices, Tracy. Nothing like this has ever happened to you before." "Never. I swear. I had to use the translator just to figure out how to say my own name. I have no idea what I was saying." "Well, maybe you took in a little bit more than you think," she responded. "Other than my name is, you mean?" "Well, I guess." The translator called and told Benoit he had emailed her a copy of the translation. It turned out to be the whole conversation I had with Travis in my dream. The other voice they were talking about was Travis's voice. The whole thing was said in Enochian. I had no idea how that was possible. "In the Bible, Arioch is told by Daniel to kill the wise men of Babylon. The name Arioch means fierce lion. It's from the Hebrew. Milton wrote of an Arioch that is a fallen angel under Satan's command. Then there is the grimoire." "What's a grimoire?" I asked Benoit. Raven answered, "It's an ancient book of spells." "Well, this says," Benoit continued, "the demon can be summoned as a protection entity. He also seeks vengeance. That's what the symbol you said was when you dreamed it. By the way, it translated exactly to 'I am vengeance.' These are the instructions on how to summon him. You have to draw a circle that looks like this." Benoit opened the email for us to see the summoning circle. It had a symbol in the middle and would look like knotted tree branches coming off of it that touched the outer rim. Officer Young couldn't hold his cool anymore. "Really? I must be the voice of sanity here. Yes, there are some crazy inconsistencies. Now, I will admit that nothing here has been logical, but our job is to keep society safe. The only way we can do that is by bringing him in. A man murdered your brother. A man can be caught. The videos taken of Tracy having an Enochian seizure are going viral as we speak. What do you think the other cops are going to think?" "Maybe you are with the wrong group." Dugast looked angry. His face was getting all red. "Maybe you should be out there stopping the tourists on the road, searching their Winnebagos," Dugast said to his partner with a profoundly serious look. "None of us are going to stop you." After that, Detective Young went back to just taking notes. I knew this was going to mean hell for me. Young was right. Gatlinburg PD was really going to think I'm part of this now. How could they not? Raven looked down at me and rubbed my arm. "Don't you dare be scared," Raven said as she rubbed my shoulder. "I have some peoples to meet with, but I'll be back." Benoit's phone rang. It was the Gatlinburg police station. Officer Ogle was on the phone. From what we were being told, he would be the new chief of police for Gatlinburg. The announcement would happen soon. We all sat and listened to Benoit's side of the conversation. She is with me." "I know. Yes, I understand. I can assure you that she only speaks English. She's spent some time translating things on the walls. She was having a seizure. I'm interviewing her now." "Absolutely, yes. Yeah, have a good night." Benoit hung up. We all knew that call was coming. He's fine with you being in custody with me for now, but he says he wants to speak with you tomorrow. He will call you when he wants you to go down there. How the hell was I supposed to explain myself to him? I couldn't explain myself to me. I'll try the truth, but I found that doesn't work really well with the police. They believe what they want to believe. Benoit and the two detectives finally left for the evening, leaving me and Kai in the tiny room with our dogs. We turned on the news and watched Megan McLeod while talking about the funeral. "I am Arioch," were the words written in Enochian across each headstone in Gatlinburg this morning, as mourners tried to lay their chief of police to rest. According to our research, Enochian is also known as demon speak. Enochian is an occult or angelic language recorded in the private journals of John Dee and his colleague Edward Kelly. This was written in the late 16th century in England. Now, as you can see, Enochian is a language of symbols. Kelly was a spirit medium who worked with Dee in his magical investigations. Arioch, according to my sources, is the name of a demon. As always with this killer, we want to warn you that the following video may be disturbing. As we were attending the funeral for Chief Reagan this morning, a young woman collapsed. This video has now gone viral. She collapsed and seemed to have a seizure before she began speaking in the ancient language. The woman happens to be the twin sister of one of Arioch's victims. If you listen carefully to the video, you will hear as her voice seems to change and split into two different voices, but both voices speaking the same language of demons and the angels. I did try speaking with the young woman, but she refused comment. We will continue to report on the very frightening situation still taking place here in Gatlinburg. "By God, you're famous!" Kai whispered as she watched the news with me. "Just what I always wanted," I responded sarcastically. My cell rang and it was Raven. She said that Crow had called and Nanny wanted to see me. Raven told me Nanny had requested I wear the same clothing that I had to the funeral. I sighed. I had just gotten comfortable. Normally, I would have asked why, but I didn't even bother anymore. I just did as I was told. "I have to go see the Crow," I said to Kai after I hung up. "Now? It's like 11 o'clock. Jake will be home soon. But I don't want you fucking out there alone. Blue and I'll go with you." I was secretly hoping she would say that. I loved having Kai around. We both got dressed and waited for Raven, who pulled up the moment we were able to get Kai down the stairs. As we drove up to Crow's place, we noticed a police car in her driveway. We all looked at each other. Raven stopped her car way down the driveway so they wouldn't hear us coming. We watched as Raven snuck up to the mobile home and peeked in the windows. She very quietly ran back to the car. "Chief Reagan's son is in there with a gun pointed at all of them. Even the babies are in there on the floor. Can you call Benoit for help?" I dialed her number and she answered on the first ring. I wondered if that woman ever slept. She didn't even sound sleepy. I told her what was happening and she asked us all to stay in the car. Blue and Hope were growling and would have been barking if we hadn't told them both to be quiet. Within 15 minutes we saw cars beginning to fill the driveway behind us. The first car to pull up behind us was Benoit's. Behind that, police car after police car began parking and piling up on the small gravel road that led to the trailer. Dugast and Young were both out with their guns drawn. Cops opened their doors and hid behind them in preparation for a gun battle. Benoit crept up to the home and looked inside. She then crept back to the cars and told the cops that Bill Reagan Jr. was inside demanding answers as to who might have killed his father. Benoit said Reagan was convinced they must know something. Dugast was standing beside Raven's car. "These guns cannot be used," Benoit said emphatically. "That trailer is old and it's rusted in spots. If anyone starts shooting, these kids in here might get shot. You need to tell all these men that have weapons out that they need to holster them." Another cop ran up to us with his gun pointed down. It was the same cop that had driven me home after my first night here. "Bill's my best friend and I can talk some sense into him. Please let me talk to him. He's so depressed about his dad. I have no idea what he's capable of right now." Benoit looked at Dugast. He gave her a questioning but accepting look. Dugast looked at the young officer. "I don't have a better idea. Whatever we can do to keep all those women and children safe, that's a good idea to me." The cop got onto the squad car microphone and yelled for Reagan. "Bill Reagan, you need to come out here right now, boy. It's Tyler, buddy. I know things has been tough, but this ain't the way, son. We have the house surrounded. All your friends are out here, Bill. We can fix this if you come out now." I watched as cops ran from their cars to surround the mobile home. There must have been 30 of them. The screen door opened, and Bill Reagan had a pregnant woman in a chokehold with a gun to her head. You hurt my wife, you fucking pig, and I'll kill you. I know where you live, Bill Reagan, you piece of shit, pedophile motherfucker. One of the men inside the house yelled at Reagan as his kin were holding him back. Several had now come to the porch while trying to hold back the captive woman's husband. Bill Reagan was shaking and crying. I know you all know something, Bill Reagan yelled. I just want you to tell me who did this to my dad. My dad never hurt anybody in his life. My dad helped every one of you hillbilly motherfuckers. And you brother-loving fucking liar. Tell him about the girl that walked down the mountain that night. Tell him you fucking lied, or I'll fucking kill her. I saw you speaking his language. Bill Reagan was talking to me. Benoit looked at me and told me to get down on the floor. I got down as much as I could, and Hope laid her body over me. Kai and Raven were holding each other in the front seat with their heads down. All I could see was the sky. The moon was full, and you could see stars twinkling. Then the sky turned black. Hundreds, maybe thousands of crows filled the sky above me. I could hear the men around me all yelling obscenities and getting back into their cars. I sat up, and black birds were circling Bill Reagan very quickly. It looked like a tornado of crows. The sound they made was like a train coming or an earthquake. Listening closely, you could hear screams of terror coming from Bill Reagan, though muffled by the sound of hundreds, if not thousands of wings. You could still hear him. Benoit had gotten into the car with me, and we were all watching as the tornado of birds became the man with the hat. Silence came over the canyon. He was a good foot taller than Reagan. I could easily see his face as he stood behind Bill. He had no jacket this time, and you could see the moonlight glistening off his huge, shiny, jet-black wings. Bill Reagan slumped to the ground with his right arm still around the young pregnant woman who fell with him. Bill Reagan was now a lump of meat dressed in a uniform other than his right arm. The man with the hat flapped his wings, and all the trees swayed and crackled. Porch chairs and baby toys flipped into the air from the wind. The winged man stood and took a good look at all of us. Then he looked directly at me for a few extremely uncomfortable seconds. His blue eyes were so piercing, and he looked younger than I thought he would. If I had to guess, I'd say maybe 30. The woman on the ground began screaming. Arioch glanced down at her and once again became the thundering tornado of birds, the same tornado he had been just seconds before. The tightly clumped birds flew away in a circular formation. The woman on the ground was still screaming and covered in blood. Crow and the woman's husband ran to her. We all got out of the cars and ran to try and help. She had tiny cuts all over her body and a huge red mark around her neck from the chokehold. Most of the blood on her was from Reagan. Several of the cops threw up after looking at the torn-apart mess that had once been Bill Reagan. All I could think of was his mother. She had seemed so broken at her husband's funeral. Now her son was gone too. None of the people that witnessed what we had would ever forget what we saw here. Every one of the Gatlinburg cops had turned off their cameras before getting to Crow's place. They were trying to protect their comrade. I looked back at the go-cam Benoit had in her car. I could see its tiny red light blinking. There would be video of what we just saw. An ambulance, the crime scene van, and the coroner were the next to arrive. They approached Bill's body and just looked at each other. I couldn't imagine how they were going to be able to pick up all of his liquefied remains. I really didn't want to wait and find out, so I went inside with Kai, Benoit, and the 2 detectives from LAPD. The cops outside were really losing their shit. None of us could unsee what we had just witnessed. Reality would be different forever for all of us. Raven grabbed my hand and took me to Nanny. Nanny looked like she had been sleeping.
"Hey, Ma, I have Tracy here for you,"
Raven said gently as we walked into her room. Nanny grabbed my dress and pulled it to her nose. She gave it a good whiff and then another.
"That's what I thought. Raven told me about your fit at the funeral. He took you to his world, baby. You smell like sulfur. You'll be different now. You'll be different in some way. Can't tell you which way, but it changes you when you go over there."
"And how do you know this?" I asked her.
"Doesn't matter how I know."
I bent down and touched Nanny's shoulder, and I got an image of her. It was like I was flying above her. She was young, and she was in the middle of a circle on the ground. The circle was huge, and it looked like there were tree symbols on it. It looked like the circle Benoit had shown me, the summoning circle for Arioch. The woods surrounded her, and then all at once the tree symbols became fire as she stood in the middle of it. There was fire all around her, and she was screaming. The fire burnt her legs horribly, and she couldn't seem to get out of the circle. The vision ended, and I looked at Nanny. If there was anything to my vision, it seemed Nanny might have summoned him. I wonder if maybe that's how she lost her legs. Nanny grabbed my arm and pulled me down to her. She whispered in my ear,
"I guess we know what changed now, don't we?"
Nanny was right. When I touched Travis, I saw the future he would have. When I touched Nanny, I watched her summon a demon. She had invited him here years ago when she was young. I was worried about people believing me. After the display of blackbirds, I hoped that would be easier.
"I was trying to protect my children from the evils of this world,"
Nanny said in my ear.
"As you can see, my family is fine. Always a price to pay, girlie. You remember that."
Ogle, the cop that would be the new chief, came into the mobile home and asked Benoit to go outside with him. She was gone for a few minutes, and when she came back, she told us that all the cops that had been there that night would need to go into the station for a briefing. She offered to take me home, but Raven told her she wanted to do it. Benoit looked at me, and I nodded my head. I wanted to stay with Kai. Raven would be taking her back, too. I leaned into Nanny's ear and I whispered, "Have you been over in his world?"
"Only once. It was on the night you just saw when you touched me. You see me screaming from the pain in that fire. I don't remember any of that. I was with him when that was going on. His world looks like our world, but it's not. It ain't this world, girlie. He comes and he goes as he pleases. When I woke up, my legs were just about gone, and I stunk of sulfur."
"You summoned him to keep you safe."
"No, I summoned him to keep all my babies safe. When you're a woman growing up here in the South, life is dangerous. I had already had uncles and others touching me in ways they ain't supposed to. I didn't want that for my girls. I knew I needed help. I was young and had no idea the powers I was messing with. I didn't really think anything would happen."
"So what changed in you?"
"Me?
I can now close my eyes and I can go anywhere. That's one of the reasons I never leave this room. I don't need to. It's like I'm flying over everything. If I hold something that belongs to someone, I can see where they are. You might see me sitting here, but in my mind, baby, I'm at the Louvre in France staring at the Mona Lisa or walking through the pyramids of Egypt. He took my legs, but he gave me wings. I've seen so many things, baby. When Blue was missing, I held a leash and I found her like it.
Nanny snapped her fingers quickly. I opened the tiny ball that hung around my neck. I took out the tooth and put it in her hand. Will you tell me where he is? The man that this tooth belonged to? Nanny looked up at me with pity.
You sure, baby?
I nodded my head yes. She closed her eyes and made a fist. An odd smell filled the air, like the smell from a match after you blow it out. Nanny's face began to slowly move back and forth like she was saying no. Tears fell from her eyes. She opened her eyes and looked up at me.
It's different than I remember. How long was I gone?
Only for a second or two, I'd say.
Time is so different over there. Kind of like there is no time. I feel like I was there for about an hour, maybe 2, maybe a day. I don't know. But I saw your brother. He's all tied up like he was when you found him. I was there that night, you know. I wasn't about to let 2 of my children and a grandson go in there alone. Not like there would have been anything I could do to help much, but I was the one that called 911 for you. I wish I had been there just a little sooner. I knew that old pedophile, you know, Neville. The one that died in his home next to your brother on Acorn Branch. I known him since we was kids. The things that were done to that boy shouldn't have been done to any child. Wasn't even like he was gone after by old toothless hillbillies. Neither was his own kin that done that to him that way. And they done it in fancy, expensive suits. He was just broke from it. We all knew it. Well, one of my grandbabies come home one day and she told me that a man in fancy clothes offered her money to go to his house and take some pictures. Well, I told her to try and find the man for me, and she did. Some of these young'uns is smart. I went with her to school every day in my mind till she found him again. There he was, that old rich pedophile. I started going to his house and just watching. He was bringing young men from all over just to watch them fuck each other. Then he brought over a little girl. Well, that was all that I needed. So I had Raven put the mason jar in the door, put the address into the jar. That's all I had to do. That should have been the end of it. But you came with all that care for your brother and grief. He's been building up since the election. There's a lot of anger that's been raised. Then came this fucking sickness and fear. Feeling pain, death, fear, grief, and all that shit. It makes him bolder and stronger. After the fire, he fed off the grief for weeks. He was about to go completely nuclear when all them donations and love started pouring in. He went back down to his regular old mean self. Still violent and ruthless, but not nuclear. Now it's all focused at him. It's like throwing lit matches into dry leaves. He gets fucking high off of all of it. High like heroin to a junkie. Now that he's had this, How can you expect him to go back and just be happy with taking those who won't be missed? Grief is the red-headed stepchild to love, and he loves him some grief most of all.
Kai! We all heard Jake's voice coming from the front door. Blue ran back to greet him.
I've been calling you forever!
Kai looked down at her phone. It was on silent. Nanny asked to see Tracy, and I was afraid of being there at the hotel alone, so... It's fine. I heard all the ambulances and you weren't home. I was just scared. I saw your location on Snapchat. He hugged her close, and I saw him smell her hair. I wonder what that must feel like. I wonder what it must feel like to be loved. I couldn't imagine being with anyone like that. I couldn't imagine being alone with a man at all, much less wanting one to kiss me or touch me. In my head, the concept of sex and fear were way too mixed. There would never be one without the other. Kai and Jake went outside to talk. No doubt she would be telling him about what we had just witnessed. This left me alone with Raven and Nanny. Do you think I might be able to calm him down?
I think you might be the only one at this point. I'm too old and crippled. Best I can do is tell you where he is. Just remember, there will be a price, and there won't be no negotiations. He takes what he wants.
Nanny looked down at her legs and then back up at me. If you can find him, why not tell the police where he is?
What? And read on the news about another pack of dead boys and dogs and whatever they tried to send in? He can't be caught, girlie. He ain't this world. You need to let everything go. Everything you thought you knew. You and Hope might be the last chance we got. The princess out there could be of some use too. He wants something with you. I just don't know what it is. I suggest you go play with your new talent and see how it works. Maybe then you'll know what to do.
What did he want from you?
My eyes. The mason jar I left for Neville. Well, it wasn't nowhere near the only mason jar, if you know what I mean. I can find 'em for him. I'll point him in the right direction. You go test that new ability of yours. You let me know what you find, girlie. I'm gonna go fly around and see what eyes can see.
Jake took me, Kai, and the dogs back to the motel. I was searching for the symbol I had seen in my vision all the way back. Finally, I found it. Benoit was right. It meant vengeance. The message he had shown me in the dream on the headstones was, I am vengeance. We were all emotionally drained. I wanted to test out my touch, so I thought I'd try it out on Kai. As we helped her up the stairs, I put my arm around her waist and got nothing. As I helped lower her back down once, we were in the stairs and my hand grazed her shoulder. I was then able to touch her skin. In an instant, I felt like I was driving down a dark road. I looked into the rearview mirror and saw Kai looking back at me. I was inside her. I could hear the music playing. Kai looked down at the radio to turn the station, and when she looked up, there was a person in the road in front of us. Kai slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The impact of the body hitting the windshield was horrific. The glass shattered, and the car came to a stop. The body slid off the car in a lifeless motion. We got out of the car and looked down at the man. His head must have hit the windshield. He was bleeding heavily from the wound on his forehead. He lied motionless and barely breathing. He looked up at us and mouthed something I couldn't understand. He was gurgling blood from his mouth and then began pleading for help. We looked around and saw no one off in the distance, just blackness. Kai made a decision and got back in the car. As she drove away, the image faded. Kai had left a man alone in the middle of the road to die. I didn't know where or when this happened. I had no idea if it had even happened at all. There would be no way for me to verify it, and I certainly didn't want to ask. I didn't want to know, and I wished I could unsee it.